The doctors didn't like what they saw. That was the moment everything changed. Not the surgery itself. Not the diagnosis that followed. Not even the announcement that came later from the Dodgers front office in the carefully measured language organizations use when they are trying to say something serious without saying everything serious all at once. It was that single sentence, spoken quietly in a hospital corridor by someone who had just seen the imaging results, that set the tone for everything that came after. The doctors didn't like what they saw. And in the hours that followed, neither did anyone else. It had started, as so many of these stories do, with something that looked like triumph. 22 home runs. The ball left Shohei Ohtani's bat the way it always does, with a kind of violent certainty that makes the result feel inevitable before the outfielder even turns around. Row after row of fans rising together. The stadium doing what stadiums do when something genuinely extraordinary happens inside them. That particular kind of collective noise that isn't just loud but feels like it carries weight. And then the cameras found his knee. Still wrapped. Still bandaged. Moving in a way that made people in the press box glance at each other without saying anything, because sometimes the most alarming things are the ones nobody wants to be the first to name out loud. By the time the fluid drainage began at the hospital, with Mamiko by his side and the Dodgers medical staff moving with the focused urgency of people who already suspected what they were going to find, the home run felt like it had happened in a different lifetime. The abnormality changed everything. The Dodgers general manager did not want to be in that press conference room. That much was visible from the moment he walked in. Not in a dramatic way. Not in the way of a man who is visibly crumbling under pressure. But in the quiet, controlled way of someone who has spent the last several hours receiving information that he would have given almost anything not to receive, and who now has to stand in front of a room full of people and translate that information into words that are honest without being catastrophic. He sat down. He adjusted the microphone. He looked at his notes once, briefly, and then set them aside. The test results, he said, had revealed something during the fluid drainage procedure that the medical team had not anticipated finding. The room didn't move. An abnormality. That was the word he used. Careful. Clinical. Chosen with the precision of someone who understands that every syllable in a moment like this carries consequences. An abnormality discovered during what was supposed to be a routine drainage. Something that changed the assessment. Something that changed the timeline. Something, he did not need to say explicitly, that changed everything. There is a phrase that had been circulating since the night before, picked up from a source close to the situation and passed through the machinery of baseball media until it landed everywhere simultaneously. Once damaged, it can't be healed. 4 words. Simple enough to fit on a phone notification. Heavy enough to stop people mid-scroll and make them read it again. Once damaged, it can't be healed. In the context of a knee, in the context of a specific type of cartilage damage that does not regenerate the way muscle does, that does not respond to rest and treatment the way soft tissue injuries do, those 4 words carry a very specific and very frightening meaning. They mean that whatever was found during that drainage procedure is not a problem that can be solved. It can be managed. It can be treated. The symptoms can be addressed and the inflammation can be reduced and the joint can be stabilized enough to function. But the damage itself does not go away. Not ever. And for a man who does what Shohei Ohtani does, who swings a bat with a rotational force that travels through his entire body, who plants and drives and twists with the full weight of that extraordinary athleticism on every single pitch he throws, the word irreversible lands differently than it would for anyone else. The video went viral before the press conference was even over. That's the world these stories live in now. By the time the GM was still choosing his words at the podium, the footage was already spreading. The clip of Ohtani walking through the tunnel after the game, the bandage visible beneath his uniform, the slight but unmistakable accommodation in his gait. Side by side with older footage. A comparison that nobody had needed to make explicitly, because the images made the argument themselves. People who had watched him all season said they had noticed something was different. That the explosiveness off the back leg wasn't quite what it had been in April. That certain pitches, certain locations, were drawing swings that looked fractionally less violent than the ones that had made opposing pitchers lose sleep all winter. Others said they hadn't noticed anything. That he had hit 22 home runs. That you do not hit 22 home runs with a knee that has meaningfully compromised your ability to generate power. Both things can be true at once. That is the terrifying part. Shohei Ohtani at less than full capacity is still Shohei Ohtani in a way that almost no limitation can fully contain. The damage was real and the production was real, and somehow both of those facts existed simultaneously inside the same baseball season, hidden in plain sight, until the fluid drainage revealed what the box scores had been quietly concealing. Dave Roberts made his decision at some point between midnight and dawn. Nobody outside the organization knows exactly when. Nobody outside a very small circle knows exactly what the full conversation looked like, who was in the room, what the medical staff recommended, what the alternatives were, and why they were ruled out. That is the nature of these moments inside organizations. The public version comes later, shaped and measured and delivered in press conference language. The real version happens in private, among people who are responsible for the outcome and who have to live with whatever they decide. What became public was the decision itself. Ohtani would not be available in the immediate term. The surgery had addressed the structural issue as directly as it could be addressed. The recovery protocol had been established. The timeline was being kept deliberately vague, which in the language of professional sports organizations almost always means the optimistic end of the range is further away than anyone wants to admit publicly. And within the Dodgers clubhouse, according to multiple people who were present in the hours after the announcement, the atmosphere was not what it normally is after a win. It was heavy in a way that winning does not usually produce. The turmoil, and that is not too strong a word for what was reported from inside the organization, was not the kind that involves raised voices or public confrontation or the visible fractures that make for easy television. It was quieter than that. More internal. The kind of tension that lives in the space between what people say and what they are actually thinking, in the careful avoidance of certain conversations, in the way a locker room adjusts its energy when something fundamental has shifted and nobody has yet figured out how to talk about it directly. Some of it was practical. Who covers the lineup spot? How the batting order gets restructured? Which pitching decisions change when you know the ace won't be available for a period of time that nobody is willing to define precisely? These are real questions with real answers, and the Dodgers have enough organizational depth that the answers exist. They are not a team that falls apart when adversity arrives. But some of it was something harder to solve than a lineup card. It was the question of identity. This Dodgers team had been constructed, in a very real and deliberate sense, around the idea of Shohei Ohtani. Not just his statistics. Not just his presence in the batting order or his innings on the mound. The idea of him. The organizing principle of him. The way that having the best player in baseball on your roster, healthy, engaged, operating at the full terrifying scope of his capabilities, changes how an entire team understands what it is capable of. When that organizing principle is suddenly uncertain, something shifts. Even in a room full of professionals. Even in a roster full of players who have won before and know how to compete without any single individual. Something shifts anyway. The GM, near the end of the press conference, was asked the question that everyone in the room had been waiting for someone to ask. Given the nature of the damage, given that phrase, once damaged, it can't be healed, what does this mean for Ohtani's long-term future as a two-way player? The GM was quiet for a moment. Not the performative pause of someone constructing a diplomatic non-answer. The genuine quiet of someone sitting with the weight of a question that does not have a clean answer. Shohei is one of the most physically gifted athletes any of us have ever seen, he said. He has also shown, repeatedly, that he approaches his own rehabilitation and his own physical conditioning at a level that is genuinely different from what most players are capable of. He stopped. seemed to consider his next words very carefully. What we found during the procedure is serious. We are not going to pretend otherwise. But serious does not mean finished. And I think anyone who has watched Shohei Ohtani for any length of time understands that applying normal expectations to him has never been a particularly accurate exercise. It was a good answer. A careful answer. An answer that said almost everything without quite saying anything that could be held against him if the recovery goes badly. But in the back of the room, a few of the writers who had been covering the Dodgers long enough to have seen other press conferences like this one, other moments when an organization tried to find the language that sits between honesty and hope, were writing in their notebooks with the particular expression of people who are not entirely convinced. Mamiko had not left the hospital. That was confirmed by someone who had been in the building and who understood, without being told explicitly, what that meant about the timeline of the recovery and about the seriousness of what the medical team had found. You do not stay through the night unless the night requires you to stay. You do not hold that kind of vigil for something minor. She had been there when the fluid was drained. She had been there when the abnormality was identified. She had been there when the surgical team made their assessment and when the decision about the procedure was finalized and when Ohtani, who never tells you when something hurts and never asks to come out and never lets the expression on his face give away what the rest of his body is doing. When he finally heard from the people responsible for his health exactly what was happening inside that knee. Whatever that conversation looked like, she was there for it. And she was still there when the GM was standing at the podium and the video was going viral and the baseball world was trying to process what the words "once damaged, it can't be healed" actually meant for the player who had defined their entire sport this season. Shohei Ohtani hit his 22nd home run. Then the doctors found something they didn't expect. Then a GM stood in front of a microphone and tried to find the words for something that doesn't have good words. Then a clubhouse full of professionals sat with an uncertainty that no lineup adjustment can fully resolve. And somewhere in a hospital, with his wife beside him and his knee wrapped and his career balanced on a medical assessment that nobody is ready to fully translate into plain language yet, the most extraordinary baseball player alive waited to find out what comes next. The home run was real. The damage is real. And for the first time this season, nobody is entirely sure which one of those facts is going to define what this year becomes.